listening to this podcast on YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, or any other platforms. I am Shah, and I invite machine learning engineers, researchers, and entrepreneurs to talk more about their current work, insights about the journey, and getting started with it. And for this particular podcast, we have someone special who is a product manager and has a great deal of experience with project management and product management overall. She's Renee Yao. She leads the global healthcare AI startups at Nvidia. She manages more than 1,000 healthcare startups coordinated with Nvidia. And prior to that, she worked as a senior product manager and product marketing manager for AI systems at Nvidia. She graduated from Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley with a focus on economics and IT. So, Renee, welcome to this podcast, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me today.
All right. So, before we get started, can you tell us a bit about how were you introduced to the AI in general, and what was the one thing that you really felt interested about in general about AI?
Sure. I was interested in AI about 5 years ago, and it was because I came from a compute world, and before Nvidia, I worked at Cisco managing the unified computing system line, which is another server. And at the time, it was actually a lot of analytics workloads. So remember that there was a peak of like all the data started like peaking. That was the time that I was in the thick and thin of the data world. And that really laid the foundation for us to be able to have the second wave of AI. And the part that in particularly interested me and piqued my interest was NVIDIA announced its DGX systems, which is the AI compute line, about 5 years ago now. Yeah, that's right. And that was when I decided, well, it's either now jumping on the train or miss it. So I just decided to jump on the train. And because of the AI's promise, be able to automatically detect, segment, and classify information a lot more efficiently, it's promised to streamline a lot of our productivity. And any of the industries that we work in is going to open doors for just an imaginable outcome. And that's why I'm in this industry now.
Yeah, that sounds pretty much interesting. I mean, most of the people like to see the benefits of AI, and it has a great potential in general. So yeah, definitely. And for a person who is basically one unique thing about this in my channel of people who I have for this particular podcast is you are a person who is at the intersection of AI products and management. So how did you figure out which of the skills you would be needed to be at such an intersection? Because I think the skills that you might have figured out was not definitely something part of a textbook. I mean, I have zero experience with management curriculum in general, but what were the skills that you thought would be something that are needed out of the textbook, and how did you go on to mastering them?
Of course. The best way to do it is just by doing it or to get to the mastery level. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of university classes actually prepare me well for my real job. And for those of you who ends up picking whatever major of your choice in the university, don't be disheartened if after you get another job and have nothing related to your undergrad or master's degree. And I would say but one thing that the university that have prepared me very well is to be able to think clearly and articulate well, and also be able to apply some of the transferable skills. So when, for example, like when I didn't really know much about compute, I went to the data center and I shadowed like solution architect to put up servers on Valentine's Day. Believe it or not, I still remember one of the days where I was on the data center floor at UC Berkeley until like 7 p.m. where my ex at the time had to call me back for dinner. So when I didn't know much about like white paper, I just go read a bunch and see which part is repeatable and which part has to be tailored. Or when I didn't know much about smart hospital solutions, jump on the calls and ask as many startups as possible, any literature that you can grab your hands on, figure out a pattern, and then just apply what you know and formulate a plan within NVIDIA to help out those companies. So that's kind of like, I think, to answer your first question of like how do you figure out what skills you really need and perhaps working towards like mastery, and even your second question specifically related to mastering that part, right? If we can just do a quick calculation, and if we currently have what like a college students maybe spend 10 to 13 hours a week on a subject, we have about like 15 weeks a semester. If you consider 2 semesters learning the same object, that's or subject, that's about like 300 hours a year learning a subject. And if you were to, for example, schedule 1 hour a day to learn something new related to your work, then that's 365 hours a year, right? To learn something. So you could still teach an old dog new tricks by just being disciplined every single day. A little bit a day goes a long way. And that's kind of my mindset of towards mastering something. And I really think after college and master degrees, your your learning just begin. It's at the very beginning. You have to learn how to learn. And in fact, there's one of the books that I think is the most transformative for me is the mastery book called the book called Mastery by George Leonard, where he really broke down three different types of characters of mastery. In opposite of mastery, let me clarify. Like, for example, the dabbler, the obsessive, I think the last one was the hacker. So the dabbler is basically those that trying to learn new skills. After learning it, then jump to the next one. And then the obsessive ones are the ones that are trying to um, went for those like growth spurt in
Mhm.
chunks and then just like left afterwards. And then the hackers are the type that went through what the other two went through, and then after it gone onto the first plateau, then stays there and then just doesn't know what to do. But the true mastery, there's like a whole process. I encourage anyone that haven't read the book to check it out, like 5 key stages of eventually get to mastery. So whenever anyone asks me if I have mastered my job, my answer is always no, because I think I'm always in the process of becoming an expert in doing something, and it takes time, right? So from that perspective, one thing that I like to tell myself is to be um, aggressively patient. Be patient with my progress, and I understand a lot of us are type A personality, but be patient in this world, and it's much, much needed.
To maybe conclude you, what you said is like consistency and being patient is much more of a good strategy that people might miss out, and it's not it's highly understated. So yeah, definitely. And I have been following you pretty much everywhere. I guess most of the content that you post out is on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I have been following your articles or maybe the Nvidia blog that you frequently post on. And I see a lot of different content every time. So you have to you are a person who has to speak about a lot of things in general, and it's really hard to say that how you come up with these things are really well researched and in a very short span of time. So as a person, like your official title says, you are a business development lead at Nvidia who is managing more than 1,000 AI startups. But I want to learn more about like what does that work routine look like. I mean, it sounds very intriguing when you say like you are managing more than 1,000 startups. So can you talk to more about like what is your work routine like, and what are the responsibilities as a person who calls business development, who is being called as a business development lead at Nvidia, and how exactly are you managing these 1,000 AI startups?
Yeah, sure. I don't really have a routine, and that's the fun part of my job because every day is super different. Well, I tried at a very minimum every day to meet at least 2 or 3 new startups that I haven't met with. And I think over time, then you kind of meet a majority of the folks that's in your program. And of course, I have my specific key performance indicator KPIs that track my success. For example, this year specifically, the top KPIs for me are recruit, adopt, and celebrate. So the recruitment is to continue to recruit a lot more startups to join the program. So that involves like I need to have a very strong understanding of the program benefits, our NVIDIA Clara as a application framework benefits, and have a clear understanding of where the startups are, what they are offering, and what stage they're at, and can our NVIDIA AI solutions help them out in any way, right? So to be able to give them the best benefit to really incentivize them to join us. And then the second part about adopt, this is the part where if they come to me to say, hey, Renee, I don't know how to do inference the most efficiently, or I don't know how to optimize on this GPUs, or you mentioned that there's a 3x increase in performance, I'm only seeing zero point 0.5, what's going on? So that's where we jump on the call with them and making sure that their adoption of NVIDIA technology stack is a seamless experience. And then the last but not least kind of pillar is related to Celebrate, which is broken down into like three small components. The first one is the the alliance program that we established with GE and Nuance, and that's where we use programs like this to help startups accelerate their go-to-market. And then the second one is related to marketing, which is when startups do amazing things and we want to write about them, right? Various different marketing channels. And then the last but not least is related to revenue. So if there are startups that use NVIDIA GPUs and are doing cutting edge work, we want to partner with them to go to market together. So you can see that even just by sharing with you what my yearly KPIs is quite diverse and requires a diverse skill set to be able to master each and one of them. And of course, there's of course sometimes like conferences at GTC, and when Jensen Huang, our CEO, needs to do a keynote demo to announce our next product, and we have a selected group of people who get early access to our products, and that requires um, a history of knowing these great startups and know which one we can trust to build a demo for our future product announcements. I hope that
Wow.
gives you a sense of like what my day to day is like, which is have no routine whatsoever, but definitely driving towards a specific KPI that's meaningful for the business.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that sounds very interesting and challenging at the same time, because as a student researcher and mostly a person who has always dealt with the engineering or research aspect of product, basically from whatever you said, I see three bubbles that are the most challenging bubbles for me if I were to be in the same position. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Is the first part is understanding these three bubbles. Is like the first one is the startups that you work with, understanding what they want
Mhm.
versus understanding what the Nvidia has to offer versus what they can do, the engineering aspect. And the third is what you said, market, which I won't go into detail because I don't know anything about it. But if you are the person who is handling these three bubbles in general, how do you go on to basically how do you go an extra mile to understand what exactly, because it's not just matching Excel sheets. Like, you are just not matching like, okay, you want this, Nvidia has this, and blah blah. So it's much more going an extra mile trying to understand what exactly these things are, and you have to do a lot of your homework, your own research. So can you talk to more about how do you go an extra mile in these cases that makes you a person really efficient as a product manager? And feel free to give an instance if you if that's an good way of describing, because I would love to learn more about like how exactly this looks in its.
Yeah, that sounds good. Jay, can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Okay, great.
I can
Awesome.
I can hear, yeah.
You froze just for a second there.
Oh,
No
sorry.
worries, we're back. Um, yes, absolutely. So I think the as soon as you have a product management background, you approach anything like a product. Meeting with a startup, pairing them up with maybe selective NVIDIA solutions are all like providing the right feature of the product to the persona, to the right user. And in that case, I think um, a lot of things related to early on have to build trust in a short amount of time. How can you build trust to make sure the startup actually want to share information with you? And then it's like to be to better understand the company's roadmap and priority, because startups changes their roadmap and priority quite frequently. So and after you figure out their priority, then it's to figure out within their priorities which one align to NVIDIA priorities. We can't solve all 10 things for one startup. We can maybe pick one, and then after that, then we define what the success looks like and then set up the project plan to help them incorporate certain technology stack. And I think a lot of times it does require a product manager or a project manager or a business development person to go that extra mile to know what the customer wants, right? Like, for example, in even just from the human side, I would know the CEO's birthday. I would know that the CEO really wants to buy the CTO an RTX 2080 for Christmas gift. It's on short supply, so if I could find one, and those are things that can help a long way. And then it's based on the startup's priority. Do I know the right people and the right technology within NVIDIA that can help them accelerate their side of the development deployment of the solutions, even though if it doesn't help with Nvidia's short-term revenue goal. So I think there's a lot of like give and take to be able to continue this relationship, and it needs to be mutually beneficial. So that's kind of how we um, essentially map a certain startup to Nvidia technology. There's no like proven science on one way to do it. It's kind of like an art sometimes as well, because they could tell you like, oh, these are my new priorities. You kind of need to connect the dots. Wait a second, late last year they also mentioned this is important. So then continue to come back and ask like clarifying questions like, does your priority last year um, is that still valid, right? Because a lot of things, yeah, it takes communication and understanding of the product roadmap to add tremendous value.
Right, right, right. And just like you said, I want to pick on one of the things that you just said is like there is no science to it behind it. It's like how do you define is? But I still want to ask this question based on your experiences. What is according to you a definition of good product management? Like for example, if you were to just explain it to someone, what does your role will entail? And it could be specific to Nvidia because I guess each company has its own list of responsibilities and expectations. But if you were to say manager, and if you were to give an advice, like what would be a definition of good product management or project management in general, and what duties that you think that that person should have in order to fulfill that particular role?
Sure. So, product manager, I think in my definition is if you think of a Venn diagram, it's like in the center of three things: communication, engineering, and design. So, of course, I think like most of the product managers at NVIDIA are quite technical. So, technical ability is table stake. Like everyone should come in with the right understanding of how the technology works. And then on top of that is like communication to the key stakeholders, not just like telling the engineers what to do or sometimes even participating QA in certain pre-trained models that's being done. And it's also communication to the upper management on why this feature and this product makes sense, and why does this product specifically justify this, how many engineers to be able to accomplish that. And then on top of that, of course, user experience is very important, right? That comes in with the product design. No matter if it's like how a engineer, how a developer is supposed to be downloading this pre-trained model, or do they have a private registry on top of a platform so they get exclusive experience, or do we actually set up an entire early access program? Those are all part of a user experience of a potential product, right? And after knowing all of that, I think the most important thing is acute interest in solving the right problem for the right users, and that's, I would say, is core to product management.
Yeah, that, yeah, I mean, yeah, that even just hearing those things, definitely, I mean, if I would a person, definitely it feels like a lot of things. I mean, again, because these things are much more not documented in general, it's much more like a over the time process. Like you have to learn as time goes and you have to adapt, as much more of a key takeaway from that is. But in order to learn these skills that you just mentioned, what is the best way? I mean, you did mention that you just go and do it, that is one of the things. But for people who still want at least have a background, I mean, definitely not every person can be a product manager, and not everybody gets an opportunity to learn while being a product manager. So for people who want to build a base into these things, what things that you would suggest as at least an ABC of being a product manager or towards a product manager? And or is there something like management degree is necessary, like, or maybe an engineering degree and plus management degree is necessary, that you would say? Yeah, how could they build up the blocks as ABC for a path towards product management?
Sure, sure. I think first of all is um, you need to figure out how you learn is the most important thing. And if you are a reader, right, read books that can add value and give you a framework of how to think about product management. For example, the book like How to Crack the Code for Being a PM. That book was pretty good. Inspire is another good book, and a lot of different books that you can really get a better understanding of what PM role looks like. That could be one way. Another way, like a lot of people do a lot of informational interviews just to get a sense of what that looks like. Other folks like to go to school. Like for example, there are like product school. If you're part of a large organization, sometimes there are product manager training sessions that can actually like a full on 2 day training with the corporation. That's actually what I went through with Nvidia as well. They train you on how to think about product management and how does that actually work within Nvidia. Just like you said, product management is quite different across many different companies, and some of the companies, for example, you could be a product manager to solve climate change. And that probably does not require you to have a lot of technical background, but it just depends on the field that you want to go into. So related to your other question about whether going back to school like MBA or all of those kind of school is that necessary, right? It could be, but sometimes if you are like engineer and you have no idea what a PM is, or you have no idea how a market works, you have no idea when I say go to market, what does that even mean? You cannot read a financial balance sheet. Yeah, maybe going back to school is good. But there are many savvy engineers that I know. They know exactly what they want to learn. They just go onto YouTube and then just search a bunch and just apply it in the real world, and they can be just as stellar too. Another way that I have done it is actually while I am doing my day job full time, I can be shadowing someone else as a product manager role, and that's another way to learn it as well. So if your organization provides opportunity like that, that could be another way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, definitely. And talking about the attitude, like this is one thing that I always like to at least highlight for myself in general on people who ask me is every job entails a kind of an attitude in general, like how you approach your work. So most of the people, like, because through a very long period of time, software development or a software development engineer was something that I really wanted to be. So they say a bottom line, if a kind of attitude a software development engineer has to carry is much more of a problem solving. You have to have that tag on your head that I just want to solve this by hook or by crook, but I need to solve this in a sustainable manner. And for research, it is much more about the creativity, thinking out of the box, like how we can do that, because these things are not done, and hence the creative mindset. What kind of attitude would you say for product management should, like, what kind of hat a person needs to wear in order to be a product manager? What is one tagline that you would say that, hey, just be this if you are feeling stuck being a product manager?
One tagline? That would be hard. Um, I definitely think problem solving is also a very good, important attitude and trait that a good product manager should have, because even solving problems for a customer, what if you don't have that feature? What if that feature will never be on the roadmap, but that's one of what your key customers really need? How do you solve that problem for the customers? Can you have any workarounds for that, right? So that's also a very important skill set for a product manager. Other things I do think being empathetic is important, practical, realistic. And from that perspective, some of the product managers like to sell the vision, but while you are selling the vision, you also need to sell what's on the truck and not try to overpromise and underdeliver. And a product manager should be very well rounded, both technical and business side, and positive. And when things hit the fan, it just you just have to have that calmness in you to be able to say, I got this and we'll figure it out together. So I would say those are the most important attitude or traits a product manager should have.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree on the last part you said, because this is way back when I used to intern at HackerRank, and the person who was in my immediate manager, who his official title was a product manager, and I always used to wonder, like, because it took me time, because that was my first official industrial internship, and when I learned what kind of things he was dealing with, what are the things that he normally does when he says it out loud in his meetings, and that was them, like I was freaking out, like what are the things like he's dealing with. I'm sure like they are little things, or maybe like to me it were little things, but they had a huge amount of things that were being done in the back end, and the way he was managing stitching all those things together. And at the end, if a person outside that company looks at it, it's like, okay, that's something that should have happened. But if you see what goes behind that product manager, the kind of messy threads that are behind that particular product, you I really agree, I agree on that part. Positiveness, like the positiveness was something that was really important, even I could see.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
yeah. And trying to deviate more on your current work, because one of the things that I really enjoy, and like the reason I found you out on in general your profile, was you work with a lot of AI startups that are focused on medical applications or healthcare applications in general. So one thing that I recently started my PhD, and it is mostly on medical imaging. So I try to see a lot of people doing a great work. They are doing, like, there are lots of startups in general, the whole startup space, and it becomes kind of a tedious job to see what are the things that people are doing. I mean, if I were to say who is the best in medical imaging, it's hard to see because there are lots of people based on lots of applications. So it's hard to point down, and you at least work with at least 1,000 startups, so you are maybe the best person I could ask this question is, what do you see a trend focusing down towards? What is a major focus a lot of people are trying to put their money in and trying to put their efforts in? And if you could, I mean, this is a very very subjective question, you feel free to take whatever stance you have is, but what is the major focus that a lot of companies right now in 2020 2021, sorry, people are trying to focus on from medical standpoint?
Yeah, sure. Let me kind of like narrow it down a little bit because, of course, I work with the companies that definitely find AI and GPU compute very valuable, and they require, like um, faster time to insight and require most likely stronger compute. So that sort of narrows it down a bit. Like I won't be able to tell you what's happening in the wearable space as an example, right? So based on that kind of criteria, I see a lot of activities happening in medical imaging for both radiology and pathology and medical instruments, a lot of GPU embedded like robotic surgery or many other devices that have GPUs inside. That's also a huge traction. Drug discovery, genomics was definitely in the spotlight last year because of the pandemic and a lot of digital health solutions, right? So no matter if it's like um, digital health, telehealth, smart hospital solutions, or telemedicine, all of those have you have seen a huge increase all the way up to like Q3. Q4 started coming down a little bit, but still very, very active in the space and in terms of funding from that perspective. So healthcare AI startups like last year, according to CB Insights, was got like $6.6 billion of funding, which is another record year, and despite the pandemic. So that's kind of like where we have seen a lot of tractions going in. And I would say that like this year, you will likely see a lot of deployment for smart hospital solutions. You will see a lot more of the drug discovery startups getting massive amounts of funding, not just from the big pharma, but from big VCs. And they will realize that, hey, spending 10 years having a drug being discovered is just no longer feasible. I really need faster compute to be able to find the right target, right? And things like that. And of course, genomics with CRISPR. Last year, we had the 2020, the Nobel Prize um, winners that's really set another high for where genomics is going to take us next. So I hope that gives you a perspective of some of the companies that
Yeah.
I'm working with. And every day I'm learning new things. Very, very exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And just a quick question and maybe a follow up on that is, what kind of challenges that you see from an Nvidia perspective? Is, I mean, definitely engineering is always open. That is not a stealing function over there. That okay, now we are done. Engineering is done. So definitely, I don't mean to ask that question in that sense. Is, but what kind of engineering challenges that you see right now that a lot of people are working on, like in terms of, for example, definitely, I mean, there's never going to be a stage that hardware would be at that stage that yes, we have delivered the best dish to you, you can do whatever you want. But what is one thing that a lot of people, or maybe a lot of startups are facing in general, that people or engineers might think that if only we had this particular thing, the products would be smooth. I mean, we could just build everything that we want.
Yeah. In general, I think across industries, you definitely see top three things like ethical concerns. If a car were to turn left and kill one person or kill one baby, and then instead of turning right to kill five human adult, like which one is the right thing and you can only turn left and right, like ethical concerns and how do you build that into AI tools. The second thing, ethnicity, inclusion of data, like different color of humans face for detecting certain things. We heard a lot of like bad news the last couple of years about that. Explainability, to be able to figure out what's going on in the black box, right? Those are all continuously to be topics that we need to have answers. And many of the startups started having some breakthroughs as well in those areas. In healthcare specifically, there's a lot of companies that are figuring this out and hope to figure out soon is the interoperability and integration with some of the existing systems, right? Like for example, like electronic infrastructure, EHR, which is the electronic health record, because those has been
Mhm.
going on for like many years, and you really need to integrate into the existing system instead of thinking I'm going to build something, come in and replace you all. And then, of course, with the healthcare space, it's the regulatory concerns. And currently, like last year, because of the pandemic, FDA have actually expedited a lot of the AI algorithms approval. But how do you build a system that could go through regulatory approval and add values? That is another engineering challenge as well. Because sometimes, quite frankly, you could build a solution that got FDA approval and cannot build into the existing, cannot get incorporated into the existing system. You can still fail. Not that like, hey, you got FDA approval, then you're good to go. So some of the other engineers end up coming out with solutions that doesn't require regulatory approval. So I think those are all engineering challenges that needs to be thought through. And it's not the just the software engineers can work alone, but also work with domain experts that have many years of experience in the healthcare industry.
Yeah, I totally agree on. I see even from a research standpoint, a lot of people are trying to address the explainability or interpretability aspect. It's a much of my personal PhD focus imaging. So yeah, definitely I agree, and yeah, I at least towards it's much more of them. But yeah, a lot of people are trying to come up with products that are interpretable, at least in the medical space. And trying to still deviate more towards your work is, I believe that a major part of your work has to be playing along the lines of being creative and coming up with novel ideas, trying to pitch whatever you are doing. So how, first of all, my first question is, how exactly, like, how, is it something that you come up with your personal experience and personal agenda that brings in the creativity while you are trying to be thinking out of the box for your workspace? And secondly is, how do you keep yourself updated to this particular domains? For example, I mean, just from an engineering perspective, I find it very challenging to understand from a medical standpoint, like what exactly it means. Like for example, if I'm working on Alzheimer's data set, it took me a long time to even understand why this particular problem is challenging to a medical community in general, let alone trying to use deep learning and all those things on top of medical data. So when you're working with startups who are trying to solve similar problems, and you have all the engineering disposal from Nvidia at your hand, how do you keep yourself updated to these domains, trying to suggest something that is out of the box, suggesting something that has been novel or maybe not even explored by someone before?
Yeah, so I think first of all, being creative or novel requires lots of experience for sure, because you need to know what's happening in the industry. So whenever I were to, before I even jump on like suggesting anything, it's minimally I have at least met with 50 startups in that space already before I can probably talk to this 51st startup that, hey, this is might be something interesting to look into. So I think volume itself laid the foundation of my understanding of the entire ecosystem before I can say anything creative, right? That's number one. Number two is, of course, read a lot and set up alerts and get the news updated. And whenever in the meeting, whenever I hear something, I was like, I don't know what that means. I write it down and do research after. And of course, is to ask the good questions. Like what you just said, you're like, why is this problem so difficult? What is it about this data set that's hard to deal with? Like ask questions like that to get to the answers that you need. Because a lot of times you don't have 10 years of luxurious experience to go through MD before you can work on this data set, right? Like, and you just need to trust that you have to ask the questions in order for you to be able to help your team members or solve a problem that you need to solve. So hopefully that gives you some perspective. Um, there's no shortcut to it. It's either you ask, or if you want to study and learn about it and know what to study is important. And otherwise, it's just be patient. You will have to hear a lot before you can be creative.
Yeah, yeah, definitely agree on that. And trying to ask a question that is a bit out of the questioning line is, you did say you don't have a work routine in general, or maybe it's on the other end, like you have a lot of work routine to call it a routine itself. How do you first of all, do you suffer from time management in general? And secondly, if you like, I mean, yeah, I figured this out, you would answer yes to that. Is if you suffer from time management, what are some of the things that you have tried to be much more organized about yourself, and how has that helped? The question is much more for people who in general face, like, not regardless they are interested in product management in general, but who are struggling with managing time, especially in these weird times.
Of course. I think we all want to be productive. I definitely do not have a regular 40 hours work week. I work a lot more than that. I'm not going to go into specific hours, but I think it helps that I love my job, but it's still important to make sure that I don't get burned out. So there are a couple of things that I actually implemented this last couple years. First of all is if you guys haven't tried it, there's this planner called Rocket Panda, I think, or Panda Rocket, one of those. And not saying that that could work for everyone, but I ended up using one of the things that they have in there, which is a 13-week roadmap. So by end of the quarter, which is usually about 13 weeks, what do you want to accomplish? And then break it down by chunks, like each week, what do you have to accomplish in order to reach that goal in the 13 months time, 13 weeks time. So then after that, then I scheduled that into my meetings. I was like, I have to finish these within this week. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's totally doable. And I'll focus on that. So that's one thing. The second thing is really to block out time to do work. I think as soon as you get into the regular professional work life, you will realize that a lot of people may want to meet with you for various different things that does not relate to at all your personal KPI or your work KPI. They just want to chat. How do you make sure that while you do that, but also make sure you have enough time to do your personal work? And then the third thing is I was recommended to do a grid view. And so basically, it's like important, not important, urgent, and not urgent. So always try to do the task of important and urgent first, and then go to the important and not urgent. And a lot of times, what I have realized was I ended up doing the important and not urgent work first because I was like, okay, if this is urgent, I will definitely finish before the deadline. And that is most often not the case because you end up spending a lot of time doing the important but not urgent work, and you have very last minute tasks that you have to accomplish within a time crunch, and your important and urgent work end up suffering, and you end up just putting in way too many hours than you can possibly imagine. So those are a couple things that I implemented in my work, and it seemed pretty good the last couple years. So at least I have my sanity, and I encourage you all to try out and to see what productivity tools work for you.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna take that particular recommendation to myself too. At least, I don't know if the people who are listening to this podcast might find it interesting, but definitely, yeah, I'll take that recommendation for myself, definitely. And trying to learn more about people who have a background in computer science, who are engineers, who might be students right now, graduate students, and who, or even in general, full-time employees at some companies. And down the line, I have seen a lot of people getting interested into product management, trying to transition to a role of product management or project management, or maybe a technical manager. I guess technical manager is also one of the roles, or engineering manager. But a lot of people lack the skills. And I mean, I want to dig more deep onto that particular part, is lack the skills. How would you, if a person who is engineer role based, in a company, how, and if he or she wants to transition to a role in product management, what are the things that you would say that you should have in order to make that transition, and what are the things that the person should learn in order to do that before even thinking about it?
Sounds good. First of all, is pick a technical field that you're familiar with to start, and really understand how to become a product manager first. That could be one thing. The second thing, I think a lot of times engineers really suffer from public speaking. They don't know how to use a short amount of time to answer certain questions or present any ideas. Definitely practice that. The third thing I think a lot of people end up overlooking is the soft skills that you need to accomplish certain things. Because believe it or not, product management is not just dealing with zeros and ones on your computer. It is a lot with dealing with people who are very hard creatures to work with a lot of times, and you have to have this soft skill to know how to motivate certain people who think differently from you, and get them to buy into your vision and accomplish a project within a certain deadline, because that's how you're going to be successful. And yeah, otherwise I think like are if you're a fast learner, you can always pick up like other technical skill sets that's transferable as well to move forward in your career. There are also product managers that are not too technical in the valley as well. So there are some product managers specifically focused more on customer experience. If, for example, in this technical area, it's just really not your forte, and it's like you have having such a hard time of even seeing a path of becoming a master in that field, it's okay. You don't have to go down that field. There's so many options. Just select something perhaps less technical so you can shine. And I think after your master, after your PhD, you don't have to keep on working on your weakness. Just let your strength shine and find what your strength is.
Yeah, yeah, that's a powerful advice. Yeah, definitely. I mean, just understanding what is the sweet spot that works for you versus who is the person who might need that. That is like finding the perfect matches is the key, I guess. So yeah, and one thing that you did mention, and I want to dig more, is specific to engineers, which is they are not great communicators. They are people who definitely likes who actually like to work with zeros and ones, which is something that I have personally found that, and I try myself, at least I'm not in that category, but trying to learn more is how do you actually go on building those soft skills. Is definitely a lot of people understand soft skills are important, but what things that you would suggest that they take out that time to learn those skills, and how they can, I mean, just saying soft skills are important might be an overstatement, but how do you go on to building those skills? What are some activities that they can do to learn more about it?
Right. First of all, is to understand the soft skill is important. I think sometimes engineers, even though they say they understand it's important, they don't believe it. And then, of course, then if you don't think it's important, you will never prioritize it. So first of all, is really truly believe in it that it's going to help you in the long run. So that's number one. Number two is like knowing that after your engineering career, you became a successful product manager in building your first product, your job doesn't just stop there, right? Because eventually you have to scale the product to a global scale. And how do you identify which potential partner that's going to help you scale your solution? And those come with who do you know? And can you understand what's going to help both your partner and yourself to be successful? It's only a win-win before you can actually establish a partnership. Then it goes to how do you actually make that work, right? So, for example, if you try to practice public speaking, I personally are part of Toastmasters for 6 years now, and every Thursday and every other Wednesday, I practice public speaking. There is a section called a table topic master section, which you are given a topic and you need to answer that question within 2 minutes. Believe me or not, like um, some of the managers will send their employees to go to Toastmasters just so they can answer questions spot on. So I encourage you guys to try it out. So that's one thing about like public speaking. Then another thing about networking, I think, especially for the introverted people might find it really difficult to network with others. But I have heard one engineer, she took this approach. This is what she did. She said, okay, I'm going to make this as engineering as possible. Like she would set up a systematic way to approach networking. So first of all is to set up a SMART goal. SMART goal we probably all understand, right? Measurable, specific, and within a time frame and stuff like that. So for example, I can say I want to network with 3 people outside of my immediate friends zone within the next 3 months. That's a SMART goal. Then after that, then you can currently go to a virtual trade show, just like how Jay and I met on LinkedIn, right? So that could be one way. And then after that, then it's find the people that you want to network with, do a ton of research. Like what Jay, you currently you did it brilliantly. You reached out to my coworker to see if I could be available, and you read everything that I probably posted and came up with a whole list of questions that's extremely relevant to my current field. Those are all networking best practices that I will encourage your audience to replicate and leverage for their experience as well. And then if you decide to reach out like on LinkedIn, like almost like a cold outreach, I would definitely encourage to send a very, very thoughtful message. Every day I get a lot of messages. Why did I respond to Jay's response, even though we haven't met before, is because of his thoughtful messages. Then after that is follow up. Follow up to say that, hey, this is a really good experience networking with you. Um, and then you can check your little checklists, give yourself a little bit of a positive reinforcement. And then after you meet the 3 networking ones, pat yourself on the back and go celebrate. This way, it's like a really positive experience and you will want to do that again and again. And after you figure out how to do it, then you can start, having like a stretch goal of who you may want to reach out to, but don't think that person will ever say yes to. Then see how it goes. It will become a challenge, especially I think for gamers or engineers in your audience. I think they always love a challenge to reach.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And then, yeah, definitely to replicate that particular thing, I definitely patted myself back when I heard back from you that yes, you would be interested to doing this podcast. So yeah, definitely, I did. I definitely did that subconsciously. So yeah, these are great advices in general. Yeah, this definitely breaks out the bubble of being introverted or a person who cannot take the stage and talk more about it. And just one last question along the same line before, because most of the people who might be listening to this podcast have a selfish motive to understand what really like so for example, when I used to interview for my internships or my full-time jobs before I did my I did my graduate school and later on my PhD, is understanding what an interviewer looks is definitely helps a lot before your preparation. So at least for software development, once I learned that it is not the answer that they want, they don't want a code, they just want to see their problem solving skills. So they don't want the code to run itself, it's just like how you think or approach the problem, and it's in that particular few seconds that the engineer makes out is he or she a good candidate for that company or not. So if you are a person, I don't know if you have interviewed people for your roles, but if you have interviewed, then can you tell us what are these subtle metrics that you have for yourself, or I don't know, in general Nvidia has for people who are interviewing? And in general, let it be much more general, you can just take it Nvidia out of the equation, is what are the subtle metrics that you would want to see in that person while you are interviewing? Because definitely we talked in this podcast a lot of things about product management in general, but you definitely don't see all of those skills just right away when the person is speaking to you. So in that particular interview, what are the things that you see that at least he or she should showcase in order to be selected for further process of the interview?
Right. Um, First of all, know, of course, like you need to know your stuff, right? Like for example, if you come in and interview for a AI system job role, but you don't know anything about how to not just like building the product, you don't know anything about the competitive world, you don't know anything about how to take this solution to market. Like for example, at Nvidia, we don't sell direct, we sell through our channel partners. And who are the channel partners that could take this on? And how would a system like that come out to be a direct competitor or a friendly competition to 1 or 2 other of our potential partners? How is that going to be a sensitive topic? I think those comes with experience of like just you will have to experience that to really know your stuff. And immediately those who know come in, they answer it with no fluff, no BS, right? It's like, I know this field very, very well. So that's number one. That's definitely from the KPI perspective, that's very, very important. And then the second thing is um, I would say a lot more on the culture fit perspective. Like, are you a humble person? Know a lot, but still humble, or are you an arrogant type of person? Can you handle stress very well? And it depends on the role itself, right? So those are some of the culture fit aspect of it. Like, if we were to ask you to work on a weekend, what's your reaction to that? So those are all kind of like different people are trained differently and they were raised differently. So I think those are things good to know in an interview. And then on top of that, um, is do you I would say like a lot relate to even how you see yourself in this role, because one of the most devastating thing could happen is you are potentially a good fit in this role because of your skill set and all that, but you are actually eyeing for something else. Like, for example, you don't want to
Mm.
just be a product manager, you want to run a company of your own. And I designed this role specifically for you to be able to take on this product management role for the next 5 years. And that doesn't fit your personal goal. So have making sure this job role is created for that candidate and that candidate specific dream and goals are somewhat aligned, or at least we could be creative in terms of setting KPIs to have that personal development, professional development built in. And I can't stress that enough because a lot of folks ended up coming to a certain job role. The managers ended up abusing his or her skill set over and over again, just do the same thing because that person is so great at it and never kept that person's future growth perspective in mind. And that's we'll just end up losing that candidate. And it usually takes about a good 9 months to really know if you had a bad candidate. And then to fire that person, ugh, that's another thing. And then
Yeah.
to rehire and then wait another 9 months to figure out that's a good candidate. So I think early on there's a lot that you will find out whether it's a good candidate or not. And then another thing I like to do is actually give the candidates a very real scenario of that job role that's happening day to day. And then I just want to ask them exactly like you said, how they think, how would they prioritize their role, what are some of the questions that they will ask, and what are some of the things that could potentially be a roadblock that they should think through.
Right. Yeah, yeah, this is definitely interesting. And yeah, it's definitely like for engineering roles, I've seen the reproducibility factor is much more higher. I mean, I won't say that hiring an engineer is much more relatively easy, but it's like hiring and like engineering work is much more reproducible. I mean, you can get the other person on board and work on those lines. But for management related roles and leadership related roles, hiring and firing a person definitely has a huge buffer stage in general for the product development process. So yeah, definitely those things are definitely a subtle metric for person interviewing.
And sometimes
And
like as little as like, oh, an engineer doesn't want to do the work if documentation is not fully in place. But that's and you just can't get the engineer to do work. It doesn't even matter what it is. And he was just like, documentation is not ready, and I'm not going to do my work. And for things like that, I think it just needs to come out during the interview to really understand how a person work. Otherwise, no matter how talented that engineer is, work cannot get done, which is just not a good fit, unfortunately. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more to that. But yeah, and yeah, just one last question before we conclude this particular podcast would be, again, this feel free to take this answer anywhere, but I just like to learn more about is, forget about the product management hat as of now, but if you are just looking at all these thousand AI startups that you are getting these ideas, like you are hearing from people who are working at this intersection of AI and medical space, where do you see these field going? I mean, what is the end goal? If I would say, let's in the next 3 years, do you see an automated industry in medical space, or what is the overall trend, like the prediction? I'm not talking about 2021, but let's say
Mhm.
2025. What is the interest for maybe medical professionals or AI researchers? What are they trying what would be a next step that you think you are really optimistic about, that you might like to see? I mean, even if that particular product is not being pitched, not in the market, not even thought yet, what is one thing that you would be optimistic that, hey, this is really interesting, I didn't expect that, this really doesn't concern me, but I would be happy if something like this really comes out, this would be so much good.
Mhm. In 5 years, I will see I think I will see a lot more adoption in federated learning, specifically in healthcare. That's one area. And last year, we definitely made quite a good headway with working with 20 some hospitals cross geo to be able to put together privacy first patient confidential patient information with that in mind to put like centralized AI models and collaborated cross continent with some of the academic hospital centers and built something quite great for the COVID model specifically. So I think because of the early success like that, that will really help solve the problems, especially for some of the startups, that don't have the data but are great at building models, and they can potentially come in and help out some of the academic hospital center and do collaborations like that without having the data leaving the centers themselves. So last year was a lot of early stage in seeing like medical imaging specifically took off in that area. And I think, a lot more in the pharma space, in pathology space, that you will see collaboration started coming in, especially for those that have like rare diseases or pediatrics and things like that. Those are really hard and rare cases to deal with. So that's definitely an area to watch. Another area, as I mentioned earlier, for drug discovery, 10 years to develop a drug, that just needs to be part of the history. That process can tremendously speed up, no matter if it's like to view the molecular or proteins or be able to figure out genomics analytics a lot more efficiently, or using like unstructured data to be able to figure out how the proteins are interacting together and things like that. Those could all be speed up in the very near future. But of course, that means it's an entire industry changing together, right? Because as soon as you see your competitor doing that, then you want to jump on that as well. And last year, in the drug discovery space, we also saw a real-time high as well in the funding investment. So when a company get $240 million in funding, they're gonna buy a little bit of a compute to speed up their process to find that next drug candidate. So that's coming as well, and I will see the next 5 years that will become a lot more mature, and people will figure out a new way to define drugs and find the molecules and visualize them. And of course, last but not least, is smart hospital space. Within the hospital, when you go in the entrance, your temperature automatically scan. You don't have a mask alert sent out. Patient fell onto the ground and immediately alert sent out to be able to predict patient behavior. Or if you are in maybe your disease is very contagious and you are isolated or quarantined in a location where you have very minimal access to nurses and things like that. Sometimes in certain hospitals, if you're like, for example, the last year, sometimes patients are in a COVID ward for 4 hours on end, cannot talk to a nurse. And that's when conversational AI could potentially come in. So I think in the smart hospital space, like last year, one of the companies, Artisite, based in Chicago, they launched the automatic temperature sensing and operating room efficiency by be able to screening and like be able to automatically capture when the doctors come in, the surgeons come in, finish the surgery, and then when the patient left, then that they logged it. So this way they can schedule as many surgeries as possible in a day to increase their revenue. Um, and another use case that they were doing were kind of like some of the telemonitoring to be able to monitor the patient's behavior. And that solution, I think they had like 9 different use cases deployed in 37 some hospitals. So you will start seeing a lot more solutions like that getting implemented, and people are going to be a lot better at figuring out how to get their solutions reimbursed by our very broken healthcare system in the US. With the first one, Viz AI, that just figured it out, which is very, very fascinating. I don't know if you know Viz AI. Viz AI is like um, it's a stroke application. So they're very, very famous in the medical imaging space. and they essentially CMS, they decided that, oh, their solution actually have added quite a lot of newness, cost, and clinical improvement criteria that fits the new technology add-on payments, NTAP. So that solution, now everyone is trying to jump on kind of like that bandwagon of how do I get my AI solutions reimbursed. So you'll see a lot of changes happening in the next 5 years now that a lot of early successors have made a dent in the industry, and many more is going to come for sure.
Is monitoring, or maybe in general diagnosis in general, that a lot of startup space in general are trying to develop less intrusion based monitoring system, so you don't have to actually be in contact with the person in order to analyze those skills. So yeah, definitely this is.
Passive, they call it a passive AI. So it happens in the
Oh,
background, and you can't even tell that it's happening. But it can significantly increase like staff efficiency and operational efficiency.
yeah, definitely agree there. But yeah, that's actually all the list of questions that I had for you in general. And I personally think this was a great podcast, because a person who personally is interested about learning about product management, potentially looking forward towards a role over this. So definitely this is something really interesting, and I hope anybody who is listening to this podcast finds this much more intriguing, or at least insightful, that has a lot of advices from a person who has been in this field since a very long time and has a great experience. So I would like to thank you. Thanks a lot for doing this on a Friday, and agreeing to this particular podcast. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for your time.